Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing They Live in the Gray, a Shudder original written and directed by Abel and Burley Vang. This story is about a social worker named Claire who is investigating a child abuse case. While she is interviewing the family, she discovers that there is a supernatural entity in the house. Luckily, Claire sees dead people and the mother begs Claire to help them communicate with the ghost so that they can get rid of it. A lot of people have said that this movie is a lot like The Sixth Sense, and I agree. It's a lot like that movie both in terms of the storyline, the somber tone of the film, and the slow burn nature of the story. Only instead of the story focusing on a young boy who has just begun his life and can barely wrap his mind around his gift, we're dealing with an adult woman who has been living with this her entire life and who has enough life experience and enough experience with loss that it makes her gift truly interesting and relevant to the story. The main loss that she's dealing with is the loss of her 10-year-old son. I don't want to get into spoilers here because we don't find out until about midway through the movie what happened to him, but she's not just dealing with the loss of her son, she's also dealing with a lot of guilt that she has because she feels at least partly responsible for what happened to him. It seems like her ability to see ghosts is both a blessing and a curse because there are times whenever she sees her son where we're not sure whether or not she's actually seeing him or if she's seeing a manifestation of her guilt. This story is a slow burn drama that happens to have lots of horror elements in it. It is not a jump scare supernatural horror movie like most supernatural horror movies out there. This story is also a lot like The Haunting of Hill House, both in terms of tone and how it focuses on a family dealing with their loss and grief and trying to move on. And it's really funny to me that people talk about how this movie is so slow, and yet that miniseries was like 10 episodes. So I think that in comparison to like a 10 episode miniseries, this movie was actually pretty brief. In regards to story length, I think that a story takes as long as it needs to take. I didn't feel like there was a lot of filler scenes in this movie, therefore I don't necessarily think that a lot needed to be cut out. And one of the filler scenes that I can think of off the top of my head is one of the few true horror moments in the movie, and I feel like if you got rid of those, then people would be complaining about how there wasn't enough like horror elements in the film. So I think the moral of this story is that you can't please everyone. Something that makes me a little bit sad is that this is one of those films that I feel like really kind of teeters the edge between horror and just straight up drama. And I feel like films like this a lot of times sort of just get lost among the other films in that it's, you know, not quite serious enough to be considered a drama, so it would never be considered for like awards or anything or recognized as a drama, but it doesn't have enough like gore and like, you know, horror elements in order to be considered like a really successful horror film among a lot of horror fans. So that just kind of makes me sad, you know, for every film like The Haunting of Hill House or Midnight Mass or Hereditary that gets, you know, a lot of critical acclaim for, you know, doing something that's different and for having really strong drama elements within this horror story. There's films like this that kind of get lost along the way because, again, it doesn't get the recognition of being a serious drama film, but it also doesn't get recognition for being, you know, a good horror film because it's not super gory or because there's not a lot of focus on, you know, the horror elements. It's really kind of straddles that line between drama and horror, and it's just a shame that this movie kind of got overlooked because it focused a little bit more on the drama. A piece of writing advice that I heard a long time ago to determine if a horror story has depth is that if you can take all the supernatural elements out of the story, is it still a good story? Is it still a story at all? And in this case, I definitely feel like even without the ghosts, there's a really strong story here. You have this really compelling drama about a social worker dealing with the loss of her own child, which is in itself a very compelling premise because the social worker feels really guilty about not being able to save her own child, and yet it's her job to save other people's children. The horror elements add to this story because the ghosts act both as a metaphor for Claire not being able to let go of her grief and move on, and they also act as a plot device to connect Claire's backstory to the main story. But if you did get rid of the ghost, there is still a full story here about Claire trying to protect this child while also dealing with her own guilt and her own demons. And to me, that makes this story a lot deeper than your average horror film. So as for the acting, I thought that the main actress did an amazing job. She absolutely carried this film as she should. And I also thought that the man that played her on-screen husband, Ken Kirby, did a fantastic job as well. There's a lot of scenes in this film that made me tear up, especially scenes between Claire and her husband. In particular, the scene where we find out what happened to their son and why Claire feels so guilty. That was a really powerful scene to me. I felt like there was some really good acting in that scene between both of them. You know, the tension felt really strong, and you know, you can just feel, you know, the grief coming from both of them. And I just felt like the acting in that scene was so good, so much better than what you see in a lot of horror films, and it was just as good as any acting I've seen in any drama. Now, the acting isn't great in every scene. In particular, I'm thinking about the husband in the family that's being investigated for child abuse. His acting was really wooden, and I could just feel the acting quality of the film drop every time he was on screen. Oh gosh, we're gonna talk about my affair again? I thought we were over this. Like in real life, dudes who cheat get really hostile when you mention their infidelity, especially if a lot of time has passed since then, because in their mind, they've already done all of the necessary groveling to get you back. But this guy didn't sound hostile. He just sounded mildly annoyed, like she left the milk out or something. So yeah, the acting from him was not great, but luckily he was only in a few scenes in this film. The majority of the scenes revolve around the lead actress, who is fantastic, which is good because in a film like this, you really need strong acting and strong dialogue, especially when you're not relying on a whole lot of horror scenes or a lot of blood and guts to keep the viewers entertained. Overall, I feel like this film deserves a solid 4 to 5 stars. It has a compelling story, great acting, and an ending that feels really satisfying. There's not a lot of gore in this movie, but there are lots of creepy, suspenseful moments throughout, and I felt like the story did a really good job of reminding you of the stakes and keeping the tension in the story in that way. You know, you don't know if the girl is going to be separated from her family by CPS, or if her and her family are going to be murdered by the ghosts. You know, the stakes are always high, and I felt like the story did a really good job of maintaining tension in that way. So 4 to 5 stars. Agree or disagree, please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you thought of this film. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On this channel, I post reviews, writing advice, horror commentary, and vlogs. And I just edited a horror anthology called Roadkill 6 Texas Horror by Texas writers. I'll include a link for this in the description box below if you want to check it out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.